started because it goes through Jefferson's presidency, his letters. I'm recalling references to, I'm trying to think of any references to slavery, but I do recall Jefferson discussing the fact that it was basically the British that started the slave trade in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the basic reasons that many people in the North opposed the British during the American Revolution, was the knowledge that that was actually the case.
Yes.
So I would like to point out, too, that the references that when, I'm sorry, I'm trying to recall the letters so I can quote something direct. One of the letters referred to when the British offered the blacks to fight on their side, they took most of them to the West Indies. And they,
This is wishful thinking on Jefferson's part.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to quote the letters.
No, you're actually quoting him. This is something that Jefferson said, and I can even tell you what the letter said. If you
Well, I'm sorry, I can't remember because I wasn't prepared.
No, there's no reason why you wouldn't.
Refer to this.
You were
But I
very
haven't
good.
quite finished, excuse me.
Okay.
So, and primarily when they were taken to the West Indies, or many of them were just destroyed because they didn't go back to England. And many of the blacks thought that they would be going to England, or that they would be going to freedom, to a better situation than they had. And if you could tell me they were taken to a better situation, I haven't gotten that far in the letters.
No, they were. And look, Jefferson and Madison were slave owners. Jefferson was more against slavery than Madison, and in the abstract. And he knew that it corrupted the American Republic, and he said things about it, and it was even one of the first things he did in politics. And he realized that, hey, the slave owners, they were going to go for this. So if he wanted to have a life in Virginia politics, he had to go along. He felt. Now, actually, George Mason from the University of Virginia refused to sign the Constitution because of its provision legitimizing the slave trade until 1808. And he thought that Washington remaining silent on this issue of the American Revolution was disgusting, and in the Constitutional Convention, it was disgusting and a betrayal. And though he had the plantation right down from George Washington, he never spoke to him again. And as for Jefferson, Jefferson has a warning letter about how everybody's slaves escaped. All my neighbors' slaves escaped, all my slaves have escaped. They've all gone to the British. And he estimated that 30,000 slaves escaped in the winter of 1780 to 1781. Now, were that true, the high figure on this is 100,000 slaves escaped in the Fourth of Britain, and that would be a quarter of all slaves at the time, which was 400,000. So it's extremely unlikely. And if anything like Jefferson's letter is true, Dunmore was freeing lots of slaves before, right, since 1775. And I've actually studied lists of blacks and when they left. There's something called the Book of Negroes, which is a list of literally 3,000 blacks who were taken by the British from New York to Nova Scotia. Most of them being free. And I could go into this, but one of the things I've shown statistically, which is a novelty for which Gary Nash praises my book on that, is that many more blacks went to freedom separately with the British than went on those boats, with General Calls in 1783, for which the Book of Negroes is the lodge. So historians say, Benjamin Quarles has this figure. There were 3,000 blacks who went on the boat, and there must be 1,000 more. There are 4,000 blacks who escaped. Canada were free, more or less. And I showed that on two lists for about 1,000 of the blacks in black settlements, I compared them to the list in the Book of Negroes. 2.5 to 3 times as many blacks came separately from those lots as were in those lots. And there's no reason to think that those settlements Georgetown's main black settlers, Charles Slade, are unrepresented. So it's probably 11,000 or 12,000. And then about 1,200 of them went to Freetown in Sierra Leone, which I described in the book, and had a big experiment for freedom. Cassandra Pybus is an Australian loyalist who writes on these things. And she has a Cassandra Pybus, P-Y-B-U-S. And in 2006, she has a book called Epic Journeys for Freedom, which include that some of the blacks who went to Britain got locked up and deported to Australia. Now, the hottest stories in Australia are two of these guys, one of whom became a kind of rodeo man, bronco buster, influential person. So it's a kind of cool thing. So she's trying to cut these statistics low to defend the honor of the British. And this is a hopeless task because Lord North, as the Prime Minister, signed Article 7 of the peace treaty, which refers to the return of slaves and other American property with which the British have absconded. And General Carleton in the United States wrote to Lord North, "I found you free, so you can't amend them. So I've made a list so you can repay them, but they're going to Canada." Jefferson, Pybus points out, and I figured this out separately, since you pointed out in the article, doesn't count that I figured it out. My book didn't get published in 2003, and our article was in 2006, so that's that. But it happens that Jefferson had 30 blacks who escaped to the British. And he thought 27 of them died of smallpox. Although what happened was when you escaped, you tried to give the impression that you died of smallpox, they would stop looking for you. So there was a lot of smallpox, and it had a big effect on the war, particularly on Dunmore, on his troops, the Royal Infantry Regiment, in 1775. But nothing like this figure is true. But Jefferson said 27 of my slaves escaped. 27 of my slaves died of smallpox. So then he said 30,000 slaves escaped, and 27,000 died of smallpox. So Pybus said, he seems to have added 3 zeros to his estimate of those who escaped from his own property. So the point is, a hell of a lot of people escaped. And by the way, they weren't enthusiastic about their slave owners. And by the way, if you read about their slave owners and what they did, no kidding, they were really rotten. A whole lot of them. The Quakers were a little better, and they were rotten. But they were, they tried. They didn't believe in slavery, and they tried to educate people, and they tried freedom. Most slave owners, they thought slavery was wrong. As Patrick Henry said, slavery is morally abhorrent, but I can't live without it.
Don't you think that the real issue
Tell me your name, brother.
is that they didn't consider blacks to be human? Therefore, it was their duty, in some sense, to enslave them.
One of the things is that there are varying fashions in racist ideology, and this view became much more prevalent with it. The fact is, there were lots of white indentured servants and black indentured servants. Jefferson himself was a racist, and if you read notes on Virginia, it's interesting in various ways. But he actually talks about black women mating with orangutans, and the idea that people have a lot of respect for Jefferson for having produced this list without noticing that says that people read this. Either they can't focus on things that are uncomfortable, which many read like that. Say something uncomfortable, we're not going to notice things you say it. Or they're racist, so they believe that kind of stuff. But actually, there wasn't a lot of racism at the time of the American Revolution. And in the South, there were a lot of people proposed gradual emancipation of slaves and thought they're Christians, There with the grace of God go I. What is the difference between me and this person? Who will take mercy on me and my sufferings? Henry Lawrence, John Lawrence, father wrote, if I don't have compassion on others. And he did a lot of rotten things. He was the head of the Second Continental Congress, a leader of bizarre attacks on black people in South Carolina. But he knew it was wrong. And Washington actually survived the Battle of Brooklyn Heights because he was cornered by the British, twice as many troops, on a promontory. And the only reason, he had 10,000 troops, they had 20,000 troops, and he would have thought that would have been the end of George Washington and pretty well the end of the American Revolution if the British had just gone to fight him. But fortunately, the British were fatheads. All the stuff about the redcoats being highly overrated, if I must say. And they thought, it's raining, so we can't go fight them. So for 2 days, the British sat there, and a naval unit from Boston of about 1,000 people, a lot of them black folks, because in the Navy, if the black folks rebelled, they'd throw the captain over the Navy. But, you get to be safe. So it's all right to have a lot of black folks fighting in the Navy. This is true of the British and the Americans. A lot of black folks in the Navy. Crispus Attucks, who was in the Navy, right? Before he showed up at the Boston Massacre. So, anyway, Washington, he was standing at the dock. He was the last person who got on the boat. And he saw all these black sailors helping his men escape. And he had been frightened out of his wits, because he was not a student, particularly military. So he said, he wasn't great, but frankly, we've just seen the wonders of David Petraeus, and frankly, if you believe the stuff about how ethnic cleansing really did great things in Iraq, probably there's a bridge in Brooklyn you want to apply. And Paula Broadwell, who I actually had some correspondence with, used to fire off drones, who was at my school. Well, he had this affair with Petraeus, and for some reason he would throw people out of office and surveil, even the higher-ups. I think there's good reason to worry about the dangers of our surveillance. I think this society is going crazy on the issue. But anyway, Washington saw this, and unlike Jefferson, Washington knew slavery was wrong. And actually, he couldn't manage his own slaves after that. He couldn't force them to do stuff. So he didn't free his slaves, including William Lee, who fought for him, his body servant, until he died. But nonetheless, what he did in the Constitutional Convention was not necessary and it was fair. But he wasn't Jefferson. Madison, I'll say one thing about Madison, just go back to the thing. In Virginia, there was a slave revolt in St. Bartholomew's County. And there was a fellow named George Levitt, who eventually got exposed and got hung. And Madison was very frightened about this, and he said this must be hidden, not just suppressed. This is 1775. And the reason for this is that slavery is the Achilles heel of the American Revolution. That's Madison. He didn't write this to Jefferson, so he wouldn't run across it in his book. But it's a really striking thing. You'll find it in my book. And the thing about it is they were all afraid of Don York, and they knew that if the redcoats relied on blacks, they would have to recruit a lot of blacks. And that's what they ended up doing. And that's how most of the dead in Yorktown turned out to be black. So I tell this story, and it's like under a veil, and people are doing pieces of it. But it's a pretty fabulous story. And there are a lot of really great heroes who, like Silas Soule, they saw things that were wrong, and they were willing to say, this is wrong. You wanted to ask something about it?
No, I actually, we're pretty much at the end of the program. Although, let me just say a couple things. One is that the book, you can purchase downstairs at the cash register for $30, and you have it autographed either downstairs or up here.
Yes, I would love to.
We do have something that we need to take care of now.